In a world where over 300 million people swipe right every day in search of love, the digital age has made finding a connection easier than ever. But beneath the surface of these seemingly innocent interactions lurks a darker reality. While dating apps promise romance and excitement, they can also lead us down paths we never expected. Paths filled with danger, deception, and terror. Here's a shocking truth. The online dating industry is valued at over $3 billion, with millions of people spending their hard-earned money to find that special someone. But what happens when the price of love isn't just money, but your safety, or even your life? In the following stories, what started as a quest for companionship quickly spiraled into terrifying ordeals that no one could have seen coming. Get ready to dive into 3 chilling tales of dating app horror. These are the stories that will make you question every profile, every message, and every match. Keep listening, because what you're about to hear might just save you from a fate you never imagined.
Story 1. The Dark Truth of Central Park. Emma had always loved the vibrant energy of New York City, the towering skyscrapers, the bustling streets, and the endless possibilities made her feel alive. But one evening in October, her life would take a terrifying turn that she would never forget. Emma had been chatting with a man named Alex on a popular dating app. His profile had all the right qualities: charming, successful, and adventurous. Their conversations flowed easily, and she quickly found herself drawn to his charisma. After a few weeks of texting, Alex suggested they meet in person. Eager to see if their chemistry was real, Emma agreed. They decided to meet at a cozy cafe near Central Park. The evening was crisp, the air filled with the scent of autumn leaves, and Emma felt a thrill of excitement as she approached the cafe. When she spotted Alex sitting at a table by the window, she felt her heart skip a beat. He was even more handsome in person, his smile warm and inviting. Their conversation was light and fun at first, filled with laughter and shared interests. But as the evening progressed, something shifted. Alex's smile became a little too sharp, his gaze lingering on her in a way that made her skin crawl. Dismissing her unease as first date jitters, Emma tried to keep the conversation going. After finishing their drinks, Alex suggested they take a walk in Central Park. The idea of strolling through the park under the stars sounded romantic, so despite the nagging voice in the back of her mind, Emma agreed. As they walked deeper into the park, the bustling noise of the city faded, replaced by the rustling of leaves and the distant hum of traffic. The park, usually full of life, was eerily quiet. Emma's unease grew with every step they took. Alex, who had been charming and engaging in the cafe, now seemed distant, his pace deliberate as he led her further into the shadows. When they reached a secluded spot, Alex suddenly stopped and turned to face her. His demeanor had changed completely. The warm, friendly man she had met was gone, replaced by someone cold and menacing. Before Emma could react, he grabbed her arm, his grip like iron. "You're not going anywhere," he hissed, his voice low and threatening. Panic surged through Emma as she tried to pull away, but Alex was too strong. He forced her deeper into the park, away from any chance of rescue. The shadows seemed to close in around her, and her heart pounded in her chest as she realized the gravity of her situation. Desperate to escape, Emma begged for him to let her go, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. Alex's eyes were dark and unfeeling, his intentions clear. Emma's mind raced as she searched for a way out, but the more she struggled, the tighter his grip became. Just as all hope seemed lost, Emma heard footsteps approaching. She turned her head just in time to see a group of joggers coming down the path. Summoning every ounce of strength, she screamed for help. The joggers froze, their eyes widening in shock as they took in the scene. Alex released her arm and bolted into the darkness, disappearing into the shadows before the joggers could react. Emma collapsed to the ground, shaking with fear and relief. The joggers rushed to her side, calling the police as they helped her to her feet. When the police arrived, Emma recounted the horrifying ordeal, her voice trembling with emotion. The officers searched the park, but Alex was nowhere to be found. He had vanished as quickly as he had appeared, leaving Emma with nothing but the memory of his chilling presence. In the days that followed, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every unfamiliar face a potential danger. The once thrilling city now felt like a labyrinth of fear and paranoia. The police continued their investigation, but Alex was never caught. Emma was left to grapple with the trauma of that night, knowing that her nightmare could have ended very differently. The city that had once made her feel so alive now haunted her every waking moment. Emma eventually moved away from New York, seeking refuge in a quieter town far from the memories of that night. But no matter how far she ran, she could never escape the darkness that had followed her out of Central Park. Story 2: The Trap of the Charming Stranger. Jake had always considered himself cautious when it came to online dating. He had heard the horror stories, the tales of deceit and danger that lurked behind seemingly innocent profiles. But when he matched with Lisa, all his reservations seemed to melt away. Lisa was everything he had been looking for: smart, funny, and incredibly beautiful. Her profile pictures showed a woman with a radiant smile and eyes that sparkled with life. Their conversations were easy, filled with laughter and shared interests. It didn't take long for Jake to feel a genuine connection. After weeks of chatting, they decided it was time to meet in person. Lisa suggested a cozy little restaurant she knew just outside of the city. It was a bit out of the way, but she assured Jake that the food was worth the drive. Eager to finally meet her, Jake agreed, excited for what he hoped would be the start of something special. The night of their date, Jake dressed carefully, wanting to make a good impression. He checked the directions Lisa had sent him and headed out, his heart pounding with anticipation. The drive was longer than he expected, the city lights giving way to darker, quieter roads. As he drove deeper into the countryside, a sense of unease began to creep in, but he pushed it aside. This was Lisa, after all, the woman he had spent hours talking to, the one who had made him laugh and smile. There was no reason to be worried. When he finally arrived at the restaurant, Jake was surprised by how empty it was. The place was dimly lit, with only a few tables occupied. He glanced around, looking for Lisa, but she was nowhere to be seen. He checked his phone for any messages. Nothing. A waiter approached and led him to a table in the back, assuring him that his date would arrive soon. Jake sat down, trying to ignore the growing knot of anxiety in his stomach. The minutes ticked by, and still there was no sign of Lisa. The restaurant felt increasingly oppressive, the shadows in the corners seeming to stretch and grow. Jake tried calling her, but the call went straight to voicemail. Something was wrong. Just as Jake was about to leave, a man walked up to his table. He was tall, with a muscular build and a hard expression. His eyes were cold, and he didn't bother with pleasantries. "Jake, right?" the man asked, his voice low and menacing. Jake nodded, his throat dry. "Yeah, who are you?" The man smirked, pulling out a chair and sitting down across from Jake. "Lisa's not coming. She never was." Panic surged through Jake as the reality of the situation hit him. This had been a setup, a trap. He stood up quickly, but the man grabbed his arm, his grip like a vice. "Sit down," the man ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. Jake sat back down, his mind racing. He was in serious trouble, and he had no idea how to get out of it. The man leaned in closer, his breath hot and foul. "You're going to give me everything you've got," the man growled. "Your wallet, your phone, and anything else worth taking." Jake's hands shook as he reached for his wallet, his mind scrambling for a way out. He knew he couldn't fight this man. He was too strong, too dangerous. But maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to escape. He handed over his wallet and phone, trying to keep his movements calm. The man took them, his eyes never leaving Jake's face. "Now get up," the man said, standing and pulling Jake to his feet. "We're going for a little ride." Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he was led out of the restaurant. The parking lot was deserted, the night air thick with tension. The man shoved Jake into the back seat of a car, sliding in beside him. Another man, equally intimidating, was in the driver's seat. As the car sped off into the night, Jake felt a wave of despair wash over him. He had no idea where they were going or what they planned to do with him. All he knew was that he had to find a way to survive. The car drove deeper into the countryside, the darkened landscape flashing by in a blur. Jake's mind raced as he tried to come up with a plan. He knew he had to stay calm, to think clearly, if he had any chance of getting out of this alive. Finally, the car came to a stop in a remote, isolated area. The two men dragged Jake out of the car and into the woods, where they tied him to a tree. The fear in Jake's chest was overwhelming, but he forced himself to keep his wits about him. "We're going to leave you here," the first man said, his voice dripping with malice. "Maybe someone will find you, maybe not. Either way, you're going to regret ever swiping right on Lisa." With that, the two men disappeared into the night, leaving Jake alone, tied to the tree in the middle of nowhere. The darkness closed in around him, and the sounds of the forest seemed to grow louder, more menacing. Jake struggled against the ropes, but they were too tight. Hours passed, each one more terrifying than the last. The cold seeped into Jake's bones, and the realization that he might not survive the night began to set in. But just when he thought all hope was lost, he heard the distant sound of a car approaching. A beam of light cut through the darkness, and Jake felt a surge of relief as he saw a car pulling up to where he was tied. A man got out, shining a flashlight in Jake's direction. "You all right there, buddy?" the man called out, his voice filled with concern. Jake nodded frantically, tears of relief streaming down his face. The man rushed over and cut the ropes, helping Jake to his feet. "Let's get you out of here," the man said, guiding Jake back to the car. As they drove away from the woods, Jake couldn't stop shaking. He had come so close to losing everything, to losing his life. The terror of that night would stay with him forever, a haunting reminder of the dangers that can lurk behind even the most innocent of online encounters. Jake knew he would never be the same after that night. The charm of a stranger had nearly cost him everything, and he would never again trust so easily. The shadows in the park, the cold eyes of his captor, the feeling of being utterly alone, they were all burned into his memory, a dark chapter in his life that he would carry with him always. Story 3: Shadows in the Park. Sophia was no stranger to the hustle and bustle of New York City. The noise, the crowds, the constant motion, all of it was part of what made the city feel like home. But the city's pulse, which had always energized her, would soon become the backdrop to a nightmarish encounter she would never forget. It was a warm summer evening when Sophia agreed to meet Alex, a man she had been chatting with on a popular dating app. Alex seemed like the perfect gentleman, charming, well-spoken, and considerate. Their conversations had flowed effortlessly, and after weeks of messaging, they decided it was time to meet in person. They chose a quaint cafe near Central Park, a place that seemed safe and public, the perfect spot for a first date. Sophia arrived at the cafe a few minutes early, her heart fluttering with anticipation. As she entered, she spotted Alex sitting by the window, a friendly smile on his face. He looked just as he did in his photos, if not better. She felt a wave of excitement as she walked over to greet him. The evening began pleasantly enough. They talked and laughed over coffee, exchanging stories and getting to know each other. But as the night wore on, Sophia began to notice subtle changes in Alex's demeanor. His smile, once warm and inviting, started to feel forced. His eyes lingered on her a little too long, and his questions grew more personal, more invasive. A knot of unease began to form in Sophia's stomach. Sensing her discomfort, Alex suggested they take a walk in Central Park. Sophia hesitated, but the idea of a stroll under the stars was tempting. She told herself she was being paranoid and agreed, hoping the fresh air would clear the tension that had started to build. As they entered the park, the city's noise faded into the background, replaced by the soft rustling of leaves and the distant hum of traffic. The park, which was usually bustling with activity, felt strangely deserted. The deeper they walked, the more isolated Sophia felt. Alex's demeanor continued to shift. He became quiet, almost brooding, as they walked further into the park's darkened paths. Sophia's unease grew with every step, but she didn't want to seem rude or frightened. She tried to make small talk, but Alex's responses were curt and distant. When they reached a particularly secluded area, Alex stopped walking. The silence between them was deafening. Sophia felt a cold chill run down her spine as she realized they were completely alone. Alex turned to face her, his expression unreadable. Before she could react, Alex grabbed her arm with a force that took her breath away. His grip was painfully tight, and his eyes, once friendly, were now cold and predatory. "You're not going anywhere," he whispered, his voice devoid of the charm that had first drawn her in. Panic surged through Sophia as she tried to pull away, but Alex's grip only tightened. She looked around desperately for someone, anyone, who might help, but the park was empty, the shadows deep and unforgiving. "Let go of me!" Sophia cried, trying to twist free from his grasp. But Alex only sneered, pulling her closer. Sophia's heart raced as she realized the gravity of her situation. This was no longer a casual date. It was a nightmare. She could see the darkness in Alex's eyes, the thrill he took in her fear. She knew she had to escape, but she didn't know how. In a desperate move, Sophia stomped hard on Alex's foot, catching him off guard just long enough for her to break free. She bolted down the path, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she ran as fast as her legs would carry her. The shadows seemed to close in around her, and every rustling leaf sounded like footsteps pursuing her. As she neared the park's exit, she spotted a group of joggers coming her way. With a final burst of energy, she ran toward them, screaming for help. The joggers stopped, their faces filled with concern as they saw the terror in her eyes. They quickly surrounded her, creating a barrier between Sophia and the dark path behind her. Alex was nowhere to be seen, having melted back into the shadows when he realized he had lost his prey. The joggers called the police, who arrived within minutes to take Sophia's statement. She was shaking, her mind racing with the horror of what had almost happened. Though Alex had vanished into the night, Sophia knew she would never forget his face, his eyes, or the terror she felt as he gripped her arm in the dark. The police searched the area, but Alex was gone, leaving no trace behind. In the days that followed, Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every shadow seemed to conceal a threat, every stranger a potential danger. The city she once loved now felt like a maze of fear and paranoia. Sophia eventually moved away from New York, hoping to leave the nightmares behind. But no matter how far she went, she knew that the darkness of that night in Central Park would follow her forever, a shadow that would never fully fade.